And now we'll be talking about collaboration. Um, so switching gears. All right. So in educational research, especially specifically in integrating technology, when teachers work with collaborators or are members of a professional learning community like we have here, they show more success in using technology with their students. And we're all here for that reason. We're all here to use this technology with our students to create authentic learning experiences, and maybe now to think about creating culturally reflective learning experiences with the technology. But there are ways of increasing success that you're not that is just better when you're together with someone. It's always better together. So let's revisit this TPACK theory of teacher knowledge, which we talked about, I think, the first day of class. So it was a while back, but my favorite learning or my favorite theory of teacher knowledge is when you're teaching with technology as a teacher, you need to know about the technology, you need to know about the content that you're teaching, and you need to know the pedagogy of how kids learn and how you teach. But not only that, the overlap between those two. What is the overlap between technology and content? What is the overlap between technology and pedagogy? So thinking about those overlapping spaces is really what this TPACK model is about. And TPACK stands for technical content and pedagogical knowledge. So that's kind of the framework that we're talking about. If you'll notice, this overlapping Venn diagram is very similar to what we do here in Fab Learning Academy. In fact, it's really core to our principles here. We're kind of looking at this same three different domains and incorporating them into our lessons here at Fab Learning. So this is from our website, I think. Technology, science of learning, which is really kind of pedagogy. And then the term that we use here is innovative practices for Fab Learning, which is where what's happening in the classroom based on your pedagogy, your understanding of learning, and kind of your technology. So how that works together. So the big difference between what we kind of focus on and what the TPACK is instead of like a content area, we're really focusing on innovative practices. So when you look at this, these are the kind of the things that we've been discussing. Constructionism is an understanding of how students learn, sociocultural learning, our technology. We've gone over 3D printing, laser cutting and etching. We've gone over vinyl cutting. And the innovative practices that we did, in 2024 were our digital fabrication for and with kids, our maker mindset, talked about project-based learning and curriculum alignment. So those are our kind of content, as it were. But going back to this to this one teacher knows everything to teach with digital fabrication technology is a real challenge for people. Um, and and most of that challenge comes in practice and training with the technology itself. So the challenges the teachers face when they're trying to really activate these centers of knowledge for their teaching is the lack of training in technology, the lack of technology support. Sometimes there's a pedagogical understanding gap, and really one of the biggest challenges that teachers face, and I can probably say this for all of you, is lack of time and space for learning and planning. That's a pretty universal comment as we get about what teachers face when they're really trying to change their methodology. Really having the time and space to do that is difficult. So these are some of the challenges that we see with this TPACK model. And lately, even though the researchers have kind of stopped writing about the TPACK model, I did meet one of them in person. I met Mishra, and I grabbed a beer with him, and I was like super fangirl about it. And I was like, what do you think about distributed TPACK model? And he's like, yes, this is what needs to be happening in classrooms. And I said, are you going to write a new article? He said, no, I'm writing about AI. So anyway, although there's no research out about the distributed TPACK model, I think that people are starting to see its benefit in schools. And that's specifically, one teacher doesn't have to know everything in order to create a lesson that integrates technology in a meaningful way and supports student learning. Um, and that is very, very important because a lot of teachers feel like they need to be the answer to everything when they walk into that classroom. So having collaboration and being able to rely on other teachers to kind of fill in what we're missing in those gaps. So you can distribute your knowledge between teachers. The subject area teacher can work with the technology teacher or whatever they might be called, to design lessons, to teach lessons, supporting students, brainstorming. There are a lot of different ways that that kind of technology expert can help support lessons in this distributed TPACK model. So thinking about it in a way is looking at the technology knowledge domain. These are on this slide. I kind of put a lot of names of positions that I've seen pop up in schools. And some of you may be in one of these positions already. You may be a technology teacher. You might be a makerspace teacher or an engineering teacher, a technology integration specialist, or a technology coach. So these are kind of words. I'm sure there are a lot more roles that you have, or that maybe even that you have in your school. But these are the people that will really know that technology. And I even put on here outside specialists, because some schools don't really have that makerspace technologist that can help you. But maybe there's somebody in the community at the library or at the local makerspace, or your local learning nodes. You know, these are outside specialists in this technology, and they are kind of helping fulfill, as right now, this technology knowledge domain in your teaching practice. Then, of course, the content area domain, which is pretty straightforward. That will be the subject area teacher, whatever subject that teacher is doing, whatever you guys are, whatever your classroom is labeled, art, science, math. And then pedagogy, which is really something that that everyone can own, really. But depending on the experience of the teacher, whether that's a subject area teacher, but you also have instructional coaches who are not always, at least here in the States, will have an instructional coach, which isn't a technology coach. This coach is really more about how are your students learning and how are you teaching these learners, really about the science of what's happening in the classroom. And then the administrator really should be your administration should have some pedagogical support for you. So if you're designing a lesson and thinking about these content knowledge areas, how can you, who are people around you that you can grab and ask and collaborate with? And then I took a model from one of the lesson plans. This is actually Susanna Martirosyan. I'm sure I pronounced that correctly. So this is from her module 2 field activity. But I looked through a lesson plan, and I kind of did a little, hey, how would this look if we did this in the distributed TPACK model? Instead of Susanna having to know every single thing every point of the way, what if we brought in specialists? So looking at this technology, pedagogy, and content, before we look at the little arrows, you know, who knows, in her lesson plan, she needs somebody that knows laser cutting, CAD design, vinyl cutting. And the pedagogy, it's really a constructionist project. So constructionism, which I spelled wrong, sociocultural learning, it's also kind of featured in this lesson plan. And then the content, of course, one of the teachers needs to know about science and life plant cycle. And once you have these couple of people working together to create this lesson or to create this learning opportunity, the overlapping spaces can be covered by those. So if you see, I wrote some things that we also need to think about when we're doing this lesson plan, and some arrows. For instance, managing the laser cutter bottleneck is a real thing. If you have one laser and 30 students, you know what I'm talking about. So you know, that kind of is in the overlap between technology and pedagogy. How can a technologist might not know exactly how to manage that bottleneck, but maybe a teacher who knows a little bit about pedagogy, working together, they can figure that out. What are some workarounds where everyone's not just waiting for the laser to be ready or waiting for the 3D printer to stop? You know, there's these things that we need to think about, the overlap. And then over here in this overlap between like content and pedagogy, strategies for supporting all students. You know, all students don't learn at the same level. You'll have some stragglers. You'll have some kids that are really bumping through this and need some extra activities. And then facilitating group work or individual work, depending on what type of project this is. From her lesson plan, it was a group work, but facilitating group work is, you know, kind of its own thing. It's a practice. It's something that you might need help with. So this is just one example of how you can take a lesson and really distribute the content knowledge areas in a way that would make the lift a little bit easier on one single teacher, particularly you who are implementing these lessons. But you know, you can't always get somebody in on the ground floor and then spend hours with them collaborating and practicing this lesson, and you know, and getting ready before you even go into the classroom. But there are other ways that you can collaborate that will really support your new integration, whatever technology that you're integrating. Um, you can brainstorm with people, remix other people's lesson plans. And this is actually, if you're on Scopes, there's a feature. If you find a lesson plan that you like on Scopes, you can click remix and then kind of add your own context to it, and it'll post yourself under your name as a remix of a previous lesson, which is really, I mean, it's a great way to asynchronously collaborate. Um, Observation, you can be observed or observe other people's lessons to see how they're implementing this technology or how their students are reacting. Sharing resources is really pretty straightforward, but a pretty easy way to collaborate. um, Sharing your projects across classes. And by that, I mean you sharing your telling the other teachers what your kids are doing in their project class, like or your kids sharing, hey, this is what we did in science class today. Isn't this cool? This is what we did. We made this, and just sharing like that. Peer feedback, and you can get peer feedback from observations. You can give your lesson plan to another teacher and ask for feedback on it. You can ask for feedback on ideas. You can ask for feedback from peers, but also from students as well. I mean, formative ways of assessing would be integral here, like seeing how your students are reacting and getting some feedback on how that is working. And then coaching, as I mentioned earlier, there are some schools that actually have technology coaches that kind of officially fill this role of coaching. But it's an important support, I think, for teachers who are collaborating. And then I wanted to share this collaboration cycle, which I just there's a researcher called Kim Cofino, and she has a pretty interesting blog about collaboration with technology, and she has quite a few published papers. But this diagram I find very interesting because she had first done this kind of what she called a collaboration continuum, and I think teachers felt that they should all be moving towards full collaboration, and they're kind of measuring themselves on the continuum, even though that's really a continuum is goes both ways. But so she redefined it into kind of a cycle. So at some point as a teacher, sometimes in a lesson you're not collaborating at all, and sometimes you're collaborating in different ways. So these are kind of her different levels, let's say, of engagement when you're collaborating, anywhere from full collaboration to partial collaboration. And you can see that she kind of defines what these mean. Coaching and then mentoring, which I think mentoring is kind of the least amount of touch time with your collaborative partner, is that mentoring. And really that full collaboration is what you're both working together to design that lesson, test that lesson, maybe even co-teach that lesson. So there are a lot of different ways that you can collaborate with others. And in fact, this module in your field activity, you'll have the opportunity, if you would like to collaborate with another teacher. So start thinking about that. You have a couple more weeks.